Hey y'all, this is Sam with the Roots of Change podcast, and we are back with Joe Cardillo. And this week we are talking about how the US government is being run like a tech company and what we should do about it. So, welcome, Joey. Welcome back.
Yeah, no, glad to be here. And yeah, what a weighty topic it is.
How are you doing in the midst of things?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I think there is this kind of this sort of running stream of information, which, we've talked about this before, but like there's a flood the zone strategy that's happening. And, so I'm limiting my news consumption and just trying to take care of myself and people around me. And also just recognizing that, like, there is a difference between the things that are being said and the things that are being done. And
Mm,
it's important to make that distinction. So that's helping me stay sane. And hopefully you're having some version of that yourself.
yes, really doing that as well. We had a really great media consumption workshop last week about just how to balance all of that, how to get kind of the top headlines, understand what's going on so that you can do your work while also, protecting your sanity, because a lot of this is noise and it's designed to overwhelm us. So really, it's like, what are the key components that are important to me in my work? But would love to get into the topic. We wanted to kind of start out just talking about, first what does it mean for the U.S. government to be run like a tech company? Like, how are these tech companies being run? We've shared just a little bit of our background in the past. I have worked in advertising and marketing for over 15 years, and I have intimately seen a lot of the big tech changes over those years, working with some of the top financial banks in the country, big tech companies. So that's where I'm coming from. And Joe, I know you have similar experiences too.
Yeah, I mean, I worked in venture-backed startups from around 2013 to 2023, so like a solid decade of, basically being in or around Silicon Valley. And I did live in San Francisco for a couple of years, and kind of in that startup world, and am, pretty familiar with sort of how things work from the smaller, startup all the way up to some of the bigger ones. It's not like I worked at Google or Meta, Facebook, et cetera, but certainly familiar with those folks and have also worked with people who worked at or were leading in those environments. So I kind of know the thought process and the habits pretty well as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to kick it off and just kind of share a little bit, like, what are some of the components to how tech companies are run and how that is, detrimental to the US government?
Yeah, let me give a little sketch. I mean, I think you're going to be able to add some context, but the things that come up, I'll sort of describe a few things that I think are really important, and they're coming to bear in this moment with Elon Musk and his sort of skeleton crew of hackers who are, running amok and basically taking and redirecting taxpayer funds. So going back to sort of the startup experience that I've had, there are some components like, first of all, founders are sort of glorified in Silicon Valley. Sometimes that is put through the lens of doers, like we're the doers and the makers, right? That's a common kind of phrase that you would hear. So founders are sort of glorified, um, as being the ones who go out there and take the risks and build something new. And sometimes that's true, but a lot of times it's just, your dad's trust fund or your uncle's guy at Goldman Sachs knows a guy. So these are not necessarily people who are taking risk because they're innovative or bright. Sometimes they're just taking the risk because they can. So there's that kind of founder glorification, and there's definitely some confirmation bias in that process for sure. A lot of times you also see in the kind of the tech and the venture capital backed environment, there's this obviously this sort of move fast and break things. I would extend that sort of metaphor to, like, we don't fix things unless they're going to make us money. So there are no startup companies that are backed by venture capitalists that will fix a long form problem like ADA accessibility on a sidewalk unless there's money to be made. And in a lot of cases, there isn't money to be made. So like ADA is a good example because the government is responsible for accessibility, so that you and me and maybe an elderly person in our life we're caring for, or someone who has a temporary or a chronic disability. If they are not going to make money, or they're not a profit opportunity for a startup or tech, they're not going to address it, right? So that's another kind of key fundamental piece. I think the other thing that often comes to bear is this sort of like all knowing, all seeing surveillance that comes with those things that I'm mentioning, which is like if the founder wants to make a dashboard that can peer into any part of the company and look at any of the data and look at the users' videos, photos, direct messages, most private, sensitive health information, they're just going to do it. That's the ethos of that tech world and that startup world, and they're going to do it whether whether they have the right to, or it's legal or it's ethical. And so those are the kinds of, there's a lot of other things, but those are the kinds of habits and norms in that environment that we are also now seeing with Elon Musk and his sort of crew of hackers going in and just sort of screwing with taxpayer funds and sensitive taxpayer data, and like they're just kind of treating it like their own personal playground in the way that they are used to treating customers, employees, and users that way. So that's kind of like a very brief sketch, but that's how I would kind of characterize that. And then if you want to add anything, Sam, please do, because I know you've also seen some of that up front too.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what you shared. And I'll just add like that like tap of money that just has been flowing into Silicon Valley. It reinforces all of the things that you're sharing. The idea that these Silicon Valley bro tech founders are gods. You start to believe that when you get all of the money that you ask for, and everyone is on board. You have the media that is supporting your vision, because because you've essentially bought the media. And so like that is really key. And I want to talk too about like the surveillance piece, because this goes back to advertising and just like the origins of big tech in general, is like how people are followed around the internet, is really designed to, quote, understand the user. And why do we want to understand the user? It is so that they can profit off of us as much as possible. And so now, after however many years we have had digital advertising, we're kind of at that kind of end point of uber surveillance, because of that kind of slow trickle of them really kind of manipulating our digital ecosystems, through like social media, and understanding, what we like, what we want to consume, and really pushing that. We are seeing kind of the flip side of that now in the federal government, with government employees. You see how they are really trying to overwhelm, make people feel lesser, feel down about their work. And that's by design to either force people to quit or demoralize the entire US government workforce. Um, do you want to talk a little bit about that too, around like the difference, like this kind of chasm between the big tech leader and then kind of everyone else?